Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the show where we take complex topics, cut through all the noise, and pull out the absolute key knowledge nuggets you need.
So you can get right up to speed fast.
Exactly. And today, we are putting on our virtual safety glasses.
Yeah.
We're digging into the world of welding inspection.
A really rigorous world.
It is. And look, we know many of you are preparing for some pretty critical professional exams, maybe even the CSWIP 3.1 Welding Inspector certification.
Mm-hmm.
So we've tailored this deep dive specifically for you. We're going to treat this less like a quiz and more like a masterclass. We're going beyond just the multiple choice answers.
Right. We want to get into context, the real world application behind 4 really essential requirements.
The goal here is to turn these core facts into knowledge you can actually use.
That's right. Because these concepts, they're the bedrock of, structural integrity, NDT, all of that. We're sort of framing this as an inspector's checklist.
I like that. So what's on the list?
Well, first, how do you prove you can even see a defect? Then, how do you make sure the recipe for the weld is sound?
Okay.
After that, how do you verify the welder's skill? And finally, how do you control the thermal environment around the weld?
It's that why behind the standards.
Yeah.
That's what really separates a certified professional from someone who's, just read the textbook.
Absolutely. It's the difference between passing an exam and knowing when you have the authority to stop a job.
Okay, let's jump straight in. First topic, proving the reliability of your inspection.
Let's do it.
So with non-destructive testing, specifically with radiography, which is basically an X-ray of the weld, the quality of that image is everything. If your radiograph isn't clear enough to show a tiny flaw, then the whole test is useless.
Completely useless. It doesn't matter how good your equipment is.
So with that in mind, let's get to the question. It is, the usual method of assessing the sensitivity of a radiograph is by means of A dosimeter, B fluoroscope, C IQI pentameter, or D clinometers.
And the correct answer, the one device required by pretty much every code out there, is C IQI, which stands for Image Quality Indicator.
Also called a pentameter.
Also called a pentameter, yes.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because sensitivity can feel like a bit of an abstract term. When an inspector uses an IQI, what are they actually guaranteeing?
They are guaranteeing that the entire radiographic process, so that's the equipment, the exposure time, the film, everything.
The whole setup.
The whole setup is capable of seeing the smallest defect that the code cares about. It's really a measure of the system's resolution.
So without that proof, the film is basically worthless.
Completely. It doesn't matter what it shows or doesn't show. If you can't prove the sensitivity, you have to throw it out.
So what is an IQI? What does it look like?
Well, think of it as a little challenge object. A tiny engineered piece that you place right on the part next to the weld. It's made of the same or very similar material.
And there are different types, right?
Yes, 2 main types. You have wire type and hole type IQIs.
And why the 2 different kinds? Does it matter which one you use?
It does, and it usually depends on the code you're working to. So, for example, many international codes use the wire type. You have to be able to see a certain number of these tiny, progressively smaller wires on the film.
Proving you can see fine detail.
Exactly. And then the hole type, which is common in some US codes, has tiny holes drilled in it. And again, you have to be able to see a specific, very small hole.
So the inspector's first job isn't even looking for cracks in the weld?
Not at all. Their first job is looking for the IQI. They have to make sure they can read that little test device. If they can't see the required wire or the required hole, the inspection stops.
Right there.
Right there. You have to reject the radiograph and go fix your technique. It is a non-negotiable step.
That makes perfect sense. And it leads us really nicely into the next point on our checklist. You can have a perfect X-ray, but it's useless if the underlying recipe for that weld was flawed from the start.
Exactly. So now we move from detecting flaws to preventing them.
Which brings us to procedure compliance. This is where, rules often clash with a contractor's confidence.
Oh, excellent.
So here's the question. Under normal contract conditions, weld procedure approval tests for pipework are
Okay.
A, mandatory. B, depend upon site and weather conditions. C, dependent upon the contractor's confidence in his procedures. Or D, only required when CO2 welding is to be used.
And the only answer here that satisfies safety codes, contracts, and frankly, the law is a mandatory.
Not optional. Mandatory. Why is this so absolute? I mean, what if a company has used the same process for 30 years with no problems?
Because structural integrity depends on things you can't see in an X-ray. It depends on mechanical properties.
Like strength and toughness.
Exactly. Tensile strength, ductility. NDT can't verify any of that. It can tell you there are no holes, but it can't tell you if the weld is strong enough.
So how do you prove that?
The only way is through destructive testing. You make a sample weld, and then you pull it apart, you bend it, you test it to destruction. And all that data is recorded in a document called the Procedure Qualification Record, the PQR.
The PQR, so the WPS, the Weld Procedure Specification, that's the recipe.
That's the recipe. It's the instruction manual for the welder.
And the PQR is the proof that the recipe actually works.
Precisely. And that proof has to exist before a single production weld is made. The moment you're working on anything critical, pressure vessels, pipelines, buildings, it is not optional.
So it's a legal document, really. It provides liability protection.
100%. If a failure ever happens, that PQR is the objective proof that the contractor followed a validated process. It's why option C, contractor's confidence, is just. It's meaningless.
It has zero legal weight.
Zero. And the other options are just distractions. Weather might affect how you follow the procedure, but not the need for it to be qualified in the first place.
Right. And it doesn't matter what welding process you're using.
It makes no difference at all. As the inspector, you have the authority and the responsibility to stop the job if there's no approved PQR for the WPS they're using. That is the power of the word mandatory.
Okay, so our checklist is coming together. We've got a good image, and we've got a qualified recipe. Now we need to look at the person actually doing the work.
The human element, the welder.
Right. We need to prove the welder has the skill to follow that recipe. This also involves destructive testing, but not always the same tests.
Correct. The focus is a bit different.
So let's look at a really common material. The question asks, which of the following destructive tests is not normally required for welder approval tests for mild steel?
Okay.
Your options are A, bend test, B, macro examination, C, impact tests, or D, fracture tests.
For a standard welder approval on mild steel, the one test that you typically would not do is C, impact tests.
Now, that seems a bit odd to me. An impact test measures toughness. Isn't toughness really important for safety? Why would we skip that?
It is incredibly important, but it comes down to the purpose of the test. You have to remember the difference between qualifying the procedure and qualifying the welder.
Ah, okay.
A welder qualification test is designed to check one thing: that person's physical skill. Can they handle the torch? Can they achieve good fusion?
Can they follow the instructions?
Can they follow the instructions? And to check that, we use the other three tests. The bend test checks for ductility. The fracture test is a quick way to check for big internal flaws.
And the macro exam?
With the macro, we slice the weld, polish it, and have a close look at the internal structure. It verifies penetration, profile, all things that are directly related to the welder's technique.
I see. So those three tests are direct measures of the welder's execution.
They are. Now think about the impact test, like a Sharpie V-notch test. That measures how much energy the metal can absorb before it fractures, usually at a specific temperature. It's a measure of toughness. But that toughness is determined by the chemistry of the metal and the filler wire, and by the heat input, things that are all defined in the WPS.
So those are procedure variables.
Exactly. The welder's skill doesn't fundamentally change the inherent toughness of the steel they are depositing. So proving toughness is a job for the PQR, for the procedure qualification. For the welder test, we just need to prove they can make a sound weld.
So impact tests are usually left for things like low temperature applications.
Perfect example. If you're building a structure for the Arctic or a cryogenic tank, then yes, impact properties are critical and will be tested in the PQR. But for a standard welder test on mild steel, it's generally not required. It's expensive and doesn't tell you about the welder's skill.
That's a great distinction. Verifying the metal versus verifying the person.
That's the key.
All right, our final point on the checklist. We're moving back from the person to the environment around the weld, specifically thermal controls.
Heat, and how we manage it.
Because getting this wrong can lead to some of the most dangerous types of failures, like cracking. So we need to know when preheating is necessary.
It's a critical piece of the puzzle.
The question is, for which of the following is preheating most likely to be required?
Let's hear the options.
A, austenitic stainless steels. B, high-strength alloy steels. C, low and medium-strength steels. Or D, low-carbon steels.
And this is a classic. The material most likely and most critically needing preheat is B, high-strength alloy steels.
Okay, let's get into the metallurgy here. What is it about these steels that makes them so sensitive you have to heat them up before you even start welding?
It all comes down to two big problems that are linked together: hydrogen cracking and the formation of a brittle microstructure called martensite.
Martensite, that's the one we want to avoid.
That's the bad guy in this story, yes. High-strength alloy steels have what we call a high carbon equivalent. Basically, they have a lot of alloying elements that make them very hardenable.
So they react very quickly to heat changes.
Very quickly. When you put a hot weld bead onto cold alloy steel, the heat gets sucked out into the base metal incredibly fast. A very rapid quench, and that rapid cooling is what forms martensite.
Which is hard, but has no ductility. It's brittle.
Exactly. Now you add hydrogen to that situation, and hydrogen is everywhere, from moisture in the air, on the plate, in the electrode coating. If hydrogen gets trapped inside that brittle martensite structure, it can cause cracking, sometimes hours or even days after you've finished welding. It's called hydrogen-induced cold cracking, or HICC.
And it's so dangerous because it's delayed.
Catastrophic because it's delayed and it's hidden. Preheating is your #1 defense.
So preheating is kind of like a metallurgical slow cooker.
That's a perfect analogy. By warming up the base metal first, you dramatically slow down that cooling rate.
Which gives the microstructure time to form into something less brittle.
Exactly, something more ductile. And just as importantly, the heat helps any trapped hydrogen to diffuse out of the weld before it can cause any trouble.
So why not the other materials? Why wouldn't you preheat a low-carbon steel, for instance?
Well, low-carbon steels have a low-carbon equivalent. They just aren't as sensitive to hardening. They naturally cool slowly enough.
And stainless steels.
Austenitic stainless steels have a completely different crystal structure. They don't form that brittle martensite, so HICC isn't their main problem. In fact, preheating them can sometimes cause other issues, like reducing their corrosion resistance.
So the choice is clear. High-strength alloy steel means a high risk of cracking.
Which means preheating is almost certainly going to be mandatory to control that cooling process.
And that wraps up our deep dive through these 4 core concepts. We didn't just find the right letters, we really cemented the why behind them. Let's do a quick review of that inspector's checklist we just built.
Okay. #1 was image reliability. You prove you can see the defects by using an IQI, which guarantees your radiographic sensitivity is up to code.
2 was process validation. The weld recipe is safe because weld procedure approval tests are mandatory. You need that PQR documentation before you start.
3, skill verification. When you're testing the welder on mild steel, you normally exclude impact tests. Toughness is a procedure variable, not a welder skill variable.
And finally 4, thermal control. You manage the cracking risk by preheating the materials that need it most. High-strength alloy steels.
And you can see how they all link together. It's a safety chain. And for everyone studying for the CSWIP 3.1, understanding these distinctions is what's going to allow you to make the right call under pressure.
Absolutely. And for a final thought to take away, we want you to think about this. Understand the authority that these standards actually give you. Go and look up the exact wording in a code like ASME-IX or an ISO standard. Find the clause that gives the inspector the right to stop work over an invalid NDT result or an unqualified procedure.
That legal weight is the real power you hold as an inspector. Use it wisely.
We hope this deep dive has been useful. Thanks for joining us.
We'll catch you next time.